Nation, if you've been following Canadian news lately, then you're already familiar with the Chinese interference question. To summarize, a whistleblower at CSIS, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, which was spun off from the RCMP in the 1980s and is Canada's equivalent of the National Security Agency in the US, if they had the powers of the FBI, gave the Globe and Mail newspaper evidence of widespread Chinese government election interference in the 2019 and 21 Canadian federal elections. For context, going into both elections, it was projected that Justin Trudeau's Liberal Party would remain in government, but with greatly reduced seat counts being used in our multi-party system to determine who the governing party would be. Seat counts matter. They're the difference between a party having the mandate to do bold things or one having to bow to the whims of more extreme minor players to get even the simplest things done. Trudeau came to power defeating former Conservative Prime Minister and war criminal Stephen Harper in 2015, and prior to 2019, Trudeau had a majority government, meaning the Liberals had more seats in the House of Commons than all other parties combined. In 2019, Trudeau was reduced to 157 seats, 13 shy of a majority, and thus began the era of his minority governance and the increase of the far left's influence on government policy. What is apparent from the information shared so far about Chinese interference is that Beijing has agents in Canada who have been actively trying to use soft influence, the internet, buying local ads, and actually laundering election funds into various races across Canada, with the intent of keeping Trudeau in power, or more accurately, keeping the Conservatives out of power. Since it was the Conservative Harper who signed the 31-year FIPA deal handing Canadian sovereignty over our national resources to communists, I'm not exactly sure why Beijing suddenly thinks the Liberals are their friend, but let's just accept that as given. If Chinese interference is true, and I stress none of the accusations have been proven yet, it's questionable whether they were actually effective, since Canadian elections are run by a nationwide, consistent, independently run, hand-counted model of vote tabulation. Most election experts believe that the interference amounts to little more than campaign influence, which all parties, lobby groups, unions, and media outlets are also engaged in during a campaign. And while it's wrong for an international organization, a non-Canadian group, to do this, as a political scientist in these highly partisan times, I doubt any campaign by anyone is capable of nudging the needle of opinion one iota. Frankly, no amount of angry memes are changing anyone's mind anymore. The concrete of polarization has set, but here we are. And as I've stated many times, normally I don't bother with a story like this for a couple of reasons. The first is context. As they're happening stories, they don't have it, except with the filter of history, and we simply don't have enough of that now. Two, I avoid hot topics in the media because they're usually being beaten to death by others, and I don't want to be just another voice in that choir. But there is an exception for me to comment on something like this, and that's when I find an angle, aspect, or approach that no one else is discussing. And here it is. As they have with every other accusation, the official Karen Party, the Conservative Party of Canada, demanded an inquiry. Under our system, a Commons committee is chaired by a member of the ruling party, but the members are made up by members of the House of Commons according to a party affiliation, meaning that every committee, from the We Scandal Committee to the Arrive Can App Committee, has had more non-government members on it than Liberals. And that's important because none of these committees have proven anything beyond overreach or mistakes by rushing to judgment and expediency, despite being heavily skewed against the government. So after much delay and filibustering by the governing Liberals, Trudeau finally appointed a special rapporteur to look specifically at Chinese election interference, which the Conservatives and other parties claim is an admission the Liberals knew they were benefiting from Beijing interference and have no interest in allowing any light to fall on their part of it. Which may be true. We simply won't know. And that brings us to a Trudeau problem. Justin Trudeau is no lightweight. He was raised in a contentious environment by an egomaniacal father and a mentally unstable mother. He is a long-distance fighter, a man used to being dismissed as a lightweight, and his greatest strength is being underestimated. In boxing terms, he's got legs. And the moment he ended up in minority territory, he did the smart thing. He opened up the Stephen Harper playbook and followed it like a religious zealot. Most of the frustrations that Conservatives complain about while trying to pin things on Trudeau are the result of him using their own tactics against them far more effectively than even Stephen Harper did against the Liberals when he was was a minority government. In short, conservative chickens have come home to roost, and they don't like it. Unfortunately, that's all their own fault. They spent so much effort and energy turning every single issue into a do-or-die partisan one that no one outside their camp believes anything they have to say anymore. And the frustrations caused by that are showing. The Conservative Party of Canada is literally the boy who cried wolf so often that when a wolf actually appeared, no one is coming. But what Trudeau is failing to realize is while a conservative voter will show up and vote for the Conservative Party even after it's proven their leader is a war criminal and an election cheat, Liberal voters expect their side to be the good guy. And unlike Conservatives, they'll switch to other parties or not vote. So regardless of the scandals Harper and the Conservatives had, they could count on a steady and strong support in the prairies and rural Ontario. They've weaponized the demonization of big city liberalism to the point their numbers have, with the exception of 2019, had a steady growth election after election. Not an actual growth. Their increases are mostly in line with increases in the Canadian population, so it's a percentage. But the base is solid and reliable. An election is called, and they know how many people will show up, even when their representatives spend time in jail, misspent billions, committed war crimes, or remain under Election Canada compliance orders for cheating. Their base stays true blue, starting with 4 million votes in 2004 and steadily growing to 6.2 million in 2019. Liberals, on the other hand, will walk away from the party if they don't like what they see, and they did in 2011, crashing party support to a dismal 2.7 million votes, largely buying into Harper's baseless personal attacks on then-leader Michael Ignatieff. So far, Trudeau's been able to work through the switch to other parties aspect. All non-conservative parties in Canada's House of Commons see too much of Trump republicanism in the Conservative Party of Canada to allow Conservatives to govern. But that's only going to work if the Liberals manage to get enough seats to remain in power. By not getting ahead of this, by appearing complicit, Trudeau is losing the faith of his voters. Voters who may not respond to the often accurate demonizing of the Conservative boogeyman in the next election. And that arrogance could result in Canada becoming a kakistocracy by default. Mr. Trudeau, as far as the special Rappaport appointment of constitutional expert and Harper's former Governor General David Johnston is a good thing, the fact remains if these questions about your party's culpability in election interference aren't answered to the satisfaction of Liberal voters, then you'll soon find yourself taking your own walk in the snow. And by default, you will have handed Canada over to the very worst person in the land, our own Ted Cruz, the incompetent, petty, and petulant Pierre Poilievre. No one else can help you with that, sir. It's a Trudeau problem. And now this.